Hey, jackass, where's my DoorDash?
I don't know. DoorDash had a problem. As their cloud-native environment scaled and developers delivered new features, their monitoring system did what monitoring systems do and kept breaking down. In an organization where data is used to make better decisions about technology and about the business, losing observability means the entire company loses their competitive edge. With Chronosphere, DoorDash is no longer losing visibility into their application suite. What's the key? Chronosphere is an open-source, compatible, scalable, and reliable observability solution that gives the observability lead at DoorDash business confidence and peace of mind. To learn more, read the full success story at snark.cloud/Chronosphere success. A lot of folks feel overwhelmed when it comes to ensuring that their personal InfoSec posture is secure. As someone who's brooded over his own security setup, I thought it might be useful if I were to expound a bit on my personal approach to securing my computing situation. My goals are simple. I want to make sure that it's not easy for others to log into my accounts, steal my identity, or install malware, and to not be completely screwed if a device is stolen. I want to be clear on the basis for this posture. I am not a named executive at a multinational company. Who I'm defending against doesn't extend to the Mossad, and the secrets that I protect won't get anyone killed should they be improperly disclosed. I talk way too much to be worth the headache of holding me hostage, so people busting into my home to demand my passwords is simply not part of my threat model. Now, if any of those things aren't true for you, make different choices than I do. The first step is, of course, to understand the threat model. Now, there are 4 basic components to my personal security posture: enabling protections on my devices, tightening up my logins, making the internet conform to my security standards, and pulling together a smart setup for my SSH keys. Let's start with the basics. Look at your computer, phone, and tablet. Install all of those outstanding software updates, both to the operating system and the applications that you use. Those aren't there just because the developers got bored with their jobs and decided to ship a new version number. You are almost certainly missing important protections if your software isn't up to date. Next, make sure that full disk encryption is turned on for all of your hardware. Every platform available today offers some form of this, and you'll never even notice it once you turn it on. But that single decision to check the full disk encryption box means that the consequences of a lost or stolen laptop, phone, or tablet is, now I gotta go buy a new one, instead of, oh my freaking Lord, my entire life has just suffered a data breach. For the sake of all that's good and holy, be sure you use a password manager. This provides a couple of very useful protections that aren't always fully appreciated. First, a password manager lets you have incredibly long and complex passwords that, if they're read aloud, will sound like vaguely pronounceable line noise at best. Those are hard to guess. Second, and I would argue more importantly, you're not particularly likely to type your password into a bad actor's website if you don't, in fact, know what the password is. If your password manager doesn't auto-populate your login info into a website, make for damn certain that you're visiting the site that you think you are. Humans are easy to fool with deceptive domain names, but computers are incredibly bloody-minded about making sure that you don't drop your banking password into someone's Facebook site because you got confused. Even before they started sponsoring some of my nonsense, I've been using 1Password as my password manager of choice. But there's a whole universe of other password managers out there that you can choose from. Heck, Apple is increasingly rolling out its own that's built into its browser and operating system. Now, the results of using any of these, regardless of which one you decide on, is that in my model, all but 3 of my own passwords are a string of random nonsense. Much like my Twitter feed if you don't know what Amazon Web Services is. I only know 3 of my own passwords: the login password for my workstation, my Apple ID, and the password I use for 1Password. Without those 3 passwords memorized, it would be really hard to log into my computer in the first place, set up a new iPhone, or unlock the password manager. In order to generate those passwords, I'm partial to an approach and eponymous tool called diceware. This has you roll a number of dice, either in the real world with physical dice or virtually in a JavaScript app that only runs locally in your browser. Then you look up the rolls that you got in a giant list of words. So if you roll the dice and get, for example, poppy symbol splurge crept, you can remove the spaces between those words and boom, there's your new password. That said, things are going to whine and complain if you don't do some silly things. So after you have your 4 random words, add a symbol or a number to the password somewhere to make password strength requirements stop whining at you. For what it's worth, add a number isn't really good advice for password security. Neither is rotate your passwords every so often, but that's a hill that I've grown very tired of dying upon. Enable multi-factor authentication, or MFA, everywhere that supports it. MFA sounds similar to MMA, the acronym for mixed martial arts. They're closer than you might think, because if you don't enable MFA, either your security person or bad actors are going to metaphorically beat the ever-living snot out of you over your poor choices. There are a few options for what those additional factors can be. SMS messages, codes generated by an application on your phone or desktop, and physical security keys. I personally bias towards the physical security key option. And for redundancy, in case I lose one, I have 3 YubiKeys, which, it turns out, pluralize as YALBKey. If I had a lot more than 3, it would then further pluralize to all YALBKey, but that'll make sense to some people. One of them lives on my keychain. The other is permanently plugged into my desktop, and the third just sits in my home office, and I only drag it out of its hiding spot to add new services to it. If all 3 of those keys are stolen or destroyed simultaneously, I figure I now have way bigger problems than not being able to tweet about it immediately. If that's too much and a bridge too far for you, great. Use an application like Authy. I'm a big fan of it because it syncs between all your devices, so I don't have to worry about losing my phone and then getting locked out of something forever. I do not use my passwords manager's support for being its own authentication device, because that really just compresses multiple authentication factors back down into the same one. You're going to want to go out of your way to avoid getting MFA codes via text message. It's not just about having spotty luck getting the codes to come through sometimes. It's apparently true that those texts are not difficult to intercept or spoof. I do want to go on a bit of a side rant here. AWS's IAM users only allow for 1 MFA device per IAM account in a bold attempt to make Azure look on the ball when it comes to security. This is shameful. AWS SSO, on the other hand, does happily support multiple MFA devices. Here's a thing I don't do. Take the lazy route by signing up for new services through my Google account. Google offers a federated identity offering that you see all over the place via the sign in with Google buttons on websites. Google's very good at security, but I don't recommend that people use this option. You see, the internet long ago decided that your email inbox was the absolute cornerstone of your online identity. If I can get access to your email inbox, I can effectively become you for basically any online account of yours that I want. Google does let sites scope down which permissions and data they need access to when you elect to use them as an identity source, but you're not always going to read those in depth every time a new thing wants you to sign in with Google. You're going to do what the rest of us do because we're humans and just click OK. The next thing you know, you've granted access for your entire email inbox to TikTok or something. Blocking ads is no longer optional. We can talk about the ethics of content consumption another time. When third-party ad platforms started becoming attack vectors for malware, I got religion on this. I block ads in my entire network by using Pi-hole as a DNS server. I use Tailscale add my devices as an amazingly lightweight full mesh VPN, but then it also just so happens to pass out that Pi-hole's IP address as the DNS server to all of my things, regardless of where on the planet I physically am. Suddenly a whole mess of ads that I'm used to seeing on web pages and in mobile apps and even on things like smart TVs are just simply not there anymore. Now, I get that this is a little overcomplicated for what most folks are going to want to do. If you don't want to run your own ad blocking infrastructure, great. Run uBlock Origin or another trusted ad blocker instead in your browser. Install your browser's equivalent of the HTTPS Everywhere extension. The EFF provides handy instructions on how to do this for any browser you might choose to use, and then laugh at the often repeated advice from the 1990s that freak out about using public Wi-Fi to do your online shopping or your banking. Look, if your bank doesn't use transport layer encryption in 2022, I'm sorry, you're going to lose all of your money if you haven't already. If you're watching this, odds are that you probably SSH into other computers from time to time. I'm a big believer in keeping your private keys for SSH in secure enclaves, or whatever the TPM branded thing on your operating system or hardware platform is, because of the way that they are explicitly built. Universally, they will not let you remove or even gaze upon the private key material that lives within them. And this is important. As a result, each device you have then gets its own key pair, but the private key never leaves the device. You cannot have your private key stolen if it is physically impossible to extract it. On the Mac, I do this via the open source tool called Secretive. You can optionally set it to require biometric or password authentication every time you use it, and I do. This effectively means that every time I want to SSH into something, I have to absentmindedly tap the Touch ID button on my laptop. It's not that heavy of a lift, I promise. On iOS and iPadOS, I use Blink, that's blink.sh, as my SSH client. It also supports using the device's secure enclave to generate SSH keys. Now, I'm sure there's something equivalent somewhere for Android, Linux, Windows, etc., but I don't have those things in my environment, and I'm going to stay in my own lane on this one. I'm also going to stay further in my lane by once again yelling at AWS over this stuff. Their EC2 key pair functionality that automatically installs SSH public keys onto EC2 instances at provision time does not support the modern cryptographic protocols that Apple's Secure Enclave requires for this type of SSH key. Another swing and a miss by AWS's security posture. Hey, wait a second. Who did they hire from Azure's security team who's sabotaging them from the inside? Anyway, let's be clear. This does mean that over time, I have a lot of SSH keys, since each device or instance gets its own. To manage all of this, I simply add my public keys to my GitHub account so I can easily grab them from anywhere and add them to the authorized keys file on any node that I want. github.com/quinnypig.keys lists all of the public keys that I've uploaded to my GitHub account. Every GitHub user has a page like this. That may be a surprise to some of you. I'm of the considered opinion that this is safe. Private keys are private, public keys can be public, and it's in the name of those things. There are some things I didn't mention here. People have, for example, asked what email provider I use, and the answer is it doesn't matter. See, this is security advice aimed for humans, and typical human beings aren't going to change their entire email address and provider for a security benefit just because it is such an annoyingly labor-intensive process. You're also not going to avoid using common services based upon their security issues if you're like most people. Yes, Facebook is invasive with its position on privacy, but most people are not going to stop using Facebook once it becomes part of their daily life. Telling folks to behave otherwise is simply not realistic. This is where so much security advice falls apart. What can I say except you're welcome, because I am just a do-gooder denizen of the internet trying to give back to my people here. In all earnestness, I do hope having some insight into my approach helps folks tighten up their personal security posture. And as always, please feel free to scream at me on Twitter or in the comments if I've missed something notable.